The year 1453 may mean nothing for most people, but was an year that changed history, in which the Ottoman Turks finally brought down the mighty walled city of Constantinople, and with it ended over 1,500 years of the Roman Empire. The Ottoman leader Mehmed the Conqueror, the young age of 21, took on the world's former superpower and won. Well, I guess you also had to factor in the fact that the Byzantine Empire was extremely weak at the time, and that the Ottomans vastly outnumbered the Byzantine defenders, most of whom were civilians. The empire had been steadily declining for hundreds of years before the successful attack. During the Fourth Crusade, invaders from Western Europe brutally sacked the city of Constantinople. These Roman Catholic troops resented the Eastern Orthodox Church, and their attack in 1204 has been seen as one of the key factors in the decline of the Byzantine Empire. So, by 1453, the Byzantines had to fend off numerous attacks from all directions and from multiple groups, and was growing extremely weak. The Black Plague of the 1300s decimated Constantinople, and by the time of Mehmed's arrival, there were only a couple of villages within the walls of Constantinople. The quote-unquote empire consisted of little more than the city and a few square miles outside the walls. So Mehmed, with relative ease, could take control of the former superpower. Although Mehmed, who came to power at the age of 19, implied that he wouldn't do anything to harm the Christian lands such as the Byzantine Empire, he soon changed his tone. He began to build Ottoman fortresses to get control of the Bosphorus Strait, on which Constantinople sat on. This cut off any potential aid that could have come to the city. Constantine XI, the last emperor of the Byzantine Empire, quickly noticed Mehmed's actions and begged for help from Western Europe. However, as mentioned before, there were hostilities between the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox Church ever since the Great Schism of 1054, and other factors such as weakened European states from the Hundred Years' War contributed to little aid being given to the Byzantines. The city itself had less than 50,000 people and 7,000 men to defend it. The Ottomans, on the other hand, had over 50,000 troops and as high as maybe 80,000 troops, including elite troops such as the Janissaries. Mehmed began by building a fleet to cut off Constantinople from the sea, and used advanced cannons to batter the city. Somehow, the Ottomans were able to create a massive cannon almost 30 feet in length that could propel a 600-pound ball over a mile. The city itself had walls along the sea and land, and were relatively strong in 1453, having recently been repaired. Contrary to popular belief, Constantinople wasn't doomed from the start. Its walls were expected to hold out long enough for, if any, aid come from Europe. The Byzantines had strung a gold chain across the state known as the Golden Horn to prevent any ships from coming in. However, Mehmed outwitted them by transporting his ships on greased logs. Although this was a major victory for the Ottomans, their attacks on the walls always failed. The Ottomans failed at digging tunnels under the walls, and although they offered an end to the siege if the Byzantines gave up the city, the emperor refused to leave and said that he was willing to die. Finally, on May 29th of the year 1453, the final Ottoman attack began, in which the experienced Janissaries attacked first, followed by less trained troops. They targeted a weak wall that had already been damaged by cannons. Then finally the Janissaries and other Ottomans breached the walls and poured into the city. The fate of the last Byzantine emperor is not known. He may have hung himself when the Turks entered the city, or in the more awesome scenario, dove right into the throng of the fighting and went down, defending the city to the last. Mehmed allowed his troops 3 days to loot the cities, and at the end of the looting, even the great Ottoman leader was brought to tears at the sight of the desecrated city, stating, "What a city have we given over to plunder and destruction? Too late for that, man." Anyway, why are we going into all of this detail? It is necessary to understand how Constantinople fell, to understand perhaps how it would have staved off its fall in 1453. Although this scenario is highly unlikely due to the weakened state of the empire, let's imagine that somehow the city was able to fight off the Ottomans. Perhaps they received more Western European aid than they did in our timeline. With more troops and ships, perhaps they could adequately fight off the Turks. This could have been the case if the Roman Catholic Pope Nicholas V had greater power over the European monarchs. Nicholas had some interest in assisting the Byzantines, but many European nations were not capable of contributing to the effort or not willing to define the will of the Pope. If Nicholas had greater power over the monarchs, it is likely a greater European force would be sent to defend Christendom. So let's say that the European troops assist the Byzantines and they fight off the Turks in 1453. Mehmed believes that he bit off more than he could chew, especially at his young and inexperienced age, and wouldn't attempt to attack again, at least within a decade of his loss. However, eventually the Europeans would pull out their troops, and when Mehmed decides to attack the city again, it would stand little chance. You see, the city was already extremely weak, and it was essentially an enclave of the growing Ottoman Empire. If Mehmed didn't conquer it, a future Turkish leader would. Byzantine was extremely tiny by 1453, and even if it remained intact, it would be little more than a thorn in the Byzantine Empire's side as it turned towards Europe. The fall of Byzantium was an event that critically wounded Christianity and allowed for the Ottomans to pose a serious risk to the Christians. Without any enemies to their rear, the Turks could sweep into Europe as it saw fit. So eventually, whether it took a couple of years or decades, the Turks would attack Constantinople again, and this time their victory would be essentially guaranteed. It is not like the city will be trying to expand its territory or anything, being surrounded by a much more powerful empire. So Mehmed, in a later age and with greater experience, attacks the city again, although he suffers much less casualties than he did in the first invasion. About 10 years later, in 1463, Mehmed II, also known as Mehmed the Conqueror, struck triumphantly into the city, facing a more dilapidated and broken city than he had seen 10 years before. So in short, world history wouldn't change that much at all. Jimmy John signing off.